I just finished another late Friday shift at Wells Family Kitchen when the story really began. Not that I realized it then. The dinner rush had been relentless. The fryer oil thick with the smell of breaded cod and garlic fries. The ticket printer coughing orders faster than we could plate them. When I finally locked the back door, the air outside felt sharp, the kind that cuts through a cotton shirt and reminds you how long you've been standing on your feet. The gravel in the driveway crunched under my tires as I pulled in a little after 11. The porch light was still on, a dull yellow halo against the dark siding. I shut off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the tick of the cooling engine. My back throbbed. My knees popped when I shifted. 68 years old and still working weekends because retirement had never quite stuck. Inside, the house was silent, too silent, in that way that tells you everyone's gone. I could almost hear the hum of the refrigerator breathing. Nelson and Lula were out again. They liked the downtown lounges with the overpriced cocktails and fake Edison bulbs. I didn't mind. The quiet suited me. Dropped my jacket over the hall chair, toed off my shoes, and shuffled into the kitchen. The tap water came out metallic at first, then cold. I drank a full glass in 3 swallows, staring at the backsplash tiles my wife Sarah had chosen 15 years ago. She'd insisted on the pattern, soft cream squares bordered by blue glass. I used to think it looked too fancy for our modest kitchen, but now it was the one thing that kept the room from feeling empty. I carried the empty glass to the living room and lowered myself into the old leather armchair. Sarah always said it looked like it belonged in a detective's office, heavy, cracked, reliable. The cushions sighed under my weight. I meant to sit there only a moment before heading to bed, but old habits pulled my phone out of my pocket. A few messages from the restaurant manager about next week's schedule, some junk mail, and a notification from Instagram, an app I used mostly to check the restaurant's account. My thumb scrolled out of reflex. Food photos, a friend's new puppy, a sunset over the river. Then, halfway down the feed, I froze. The thumbnail showed my own living room. The same corner I was sitting in, the fireplace, the brass lamp, the bookshelf Sarah had made me build in that first summer after we married. For a second, my mind refused to process it. Maybe it was an old post. Maybe Lula had filmed something harmless. But then I saw the caption. Life with the museum exhibit, #boomer-energy, #relic life. Nelson's name. Memphis tightened. Against my better judgment, I tapped the video. It opened with a shaky shot of the hallway, my phone component, then swung into view of Nelson himself, walking in an exaggerated shuffle. His back was hunched, his hand trembling theatrically. He let out a quavering groan. "Oh no," he said in a cracked falsetto. "Where did I put my pills? What year is it?" He straightened suddenly, grinning at the camera. "That's Ruben checking what day it is. Every single morning. Legislation. Off-screen, Lula's, light and embarrassed." Elson walked across the living room, gesturing at the furniture. "Welcome to the museum, folks. Everything here is from 1987. The disgusting old man refuses to update anything because he's stuck in the past, just like his brain." He picked up my universal remote from the side table, the one I'd spent a whole afternoon programming after the cable company switched boxes. Behold, ancient technology. He thinks he's a genius for figuring this thing out. The camera zoomed on my chair, then my framed photo of Sarah on the mantel. That's his late wife, the saint. She's been gone 15 years and he still talks to her picture like she's going to answer. Plunged Lula's voice again, quieter this time. "Nelson, that's enough." Video ended with him doing another exaggerated shuffle out of frame, the caption repeating across the screen in neon text. "Disbenamel. When you live with the past." 2,000 views, 300 likes, dozens of comments, laughing emojis, people tagging friends, a few lines of "OMG, I can't." My hand went cold around the phone. Moments when anger comes like a match flare, bright, sudden, gone. This was not that. This was something slower, denser. The kind of anger that settles behind the ribs and begins to harden into stone. Set the phone face down on the side table and stared at the carpet. The sound of my own breathing filled the room. I thought of the nights I'd covered Nelson's portion of the rent when he lost his job, of co-signing his car loan, of giving them the master bedroom because he likes long showers. The man mocking me online had eaten food bought with my money, slept under my roof, used my Wi-Fi to upload his little comedy sketch. I wanted to stand, to march into their room and rip the phone from his hands, but something inside me whispered no. Rage would make me predictable. Predictable men are easy to corner, easy to manipulate. Instead, I stood slowly, walked to the front window and looked out at the empty street. The Hendersons' TV flickered blue behind their curtains. A car passed, headlights sweeping across my ceiling like a spotlight. 8 years I'd owned this house, paid it off in 25. The mortgage papers still sat in a folder marked, "Paid in full." Sarah and I had built everything here brick by brick. Now I felt like a guest in my own museum. To the chair and sat again, spine straight, hands flat on the armrests, the phone still face down beside me. Whatever I did next needed to be right, not fast. Anger makes you sloppy. Sloppy men get caught. Oswald. Time crawled. The digital clock on the DVD player flipped from 11:48 to 12:33 to 1:09. The house stayed dark and still, as if it were holding its breath. Finally, headlights flashed through the window, their car pulling up. Voices floated in, laughter cutting through the night air. I rose, went to the kitchen, and filled the kettle. The water hissed, and the sound steadied me. By the time the key turned in the lock, I had 2 mugs on the counter, honey already spooned into mine. "Hey, Reuben, you still up?" Nelson's voice came easy, careless. "Just some tea," I said, tone even. "Long day at the restaurant." Loom appeared, cheeks flushed from the cold. "How was the dinner rush?" "Steady," I said, the usual Friday crowd. Nelson leaned against the counter, phone in hand, scrolling. "We grabbed food downtown. Didn't want to bother you for cooking." I looked up from the kettle and smiled faintly. How considerate. He didn't catch the edge in it. Or maybe he did and pretended not to. Lula touched my shoulder. "You look tired, Dad. Get some rest." "I will," I said. "You two have a good evening." "Great evening," Nelson said, grin widening. There was something in his tone, a kind of smugness that people wear when they think they've gotten away with something. I turned back to my tea. Glad someone's having fun. Don't stay up too late. Their bedroom door closed a minute later. I stood in the kitchen, stirring honey into the hot water until the spoon clinked softly against the mug. The house creaked around me. When the tea was gone, I rinsed the cup and placed it in the rack. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered. Hair thin at the crown, shoulders stooped. Maybe that was what Nelson saw. A man fading into irrelevance. In my room, I lay on top of the covers, still dressed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept looping back to that moment, the laughter, the captions, the strangers pointing digital fingers. I'd seen humiliation before, in business, in life, but nothing ever stung quite like mockery from your own blood. 3 in the morning, I'd mapped every choice I could make. Confrontation? Too obvious. Forgiveness? Too weak. Silence? Too easy to mistake for defeat. I needed something subtle, something that would linger. That was when I remembered the restaurant's old marketing account. Years ago, some consultant had convinced me to create an Instagram for promotion. I'd never used it, couldn't even recall the password. It took 15 minutes and 2 verification emails, but I got in. The account was blank, no profile picture, no followers, no posts, a ghost. Perfect. I went back to Nelson's video. The views had climbed to 2,400. The comments section was still buzzing. I scrolled all the way down and tapped the text box. The keyboard felt huge under my thumb. I typed slowly, deliberately, letting each word settle in my head before committing to it. Esther 63, I know what you did. Mr. Strach. 6 words, no punctuation, no emojis, no hint of identity. Mr. Strach. My thumb hovered over post. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. There's a line between petty revenge and something colder. and I knew I was about to cross it. But then I thought of the grin on his face, the laughter of strangers, the way he'd looked at my photo of Sarah. I pressed post. Pressed post. The comment appeared at the bottom of the thread, plain and anonymous. It blended in perfectly, almost invisible, yet impossible to ignore once you saw it. I locked the phone, set it on the nightstand, and turned off the lamp. The darkness folded around me like water. My heartbeat slowed. For the first time in hours, my muscles unclenched. Let him find it. Let him wonder. Let him scroll through every memory in his mind, searching for the mistake he thinks someone discovered. Let him sweat under the weight of guilt he hasn't earned. Or maybe he has. I closed my eyes and smiled in the dark. Sleep, when it finally came, felt earned. Not peaceful, but satisfying. The kind that settles into your bones after a long, deliberate act. Morning broke gray and silent. The furnace kicked on with its usual sigh. My body woke before the alarm, as it always did after 30 years in the restaurant business. The phone lay on the nightstand, screen dark. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. Instead, I pulled on khakis and a clean shirt, brewed coffee, and stepped onto the porch to fetch the newspaper. The world looked the same, but something in me had shifted. A tiny realignment, like a bone set back into place. Marlins would find that think comment soon, and when he did, he'd start asking questions. Who knew? What did they mean? That's how guilt works. It doesn't need proof. It just needs a whisper. Inside, the kettle began to hiss again. Poured the coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and unfolded the paper. The sports section stared back, words blurring into meaningless lines. Outside, the first sunlight touched the frost on the grass. I took a slow sip and smiled. It had begun. When I woke, the house felt heavier than usual, as though the air itself had thickened overnight. The kettle sat clean in the rack. The coffee maker gleamed on the counter, and the silence that had comforted me yesterday now hummed with a faint, electric tension. I didn't check the phone right away. Old habits die hard, but I wanted to savor the moment between knowing and not knowing. The calm before a new truth reveals itself. I showered, dressed, and read the paper front to back before finally touching the screen. There it was. The comment still sat beneath Nelson's video, unacknowledged but not unseen. The view count had climbed past 3,000. A few new reactions, a handful of LMFAO replies. Yet in the middle of all that noise, my 6 words glimmered like a shard of glass. Emirates, X, what you did. Sidic, no one had responded to it, but someone had seen it. I could feel that certainty like a pulse. Immigration. Udoff. The bedroom door creaked. Footsteps shuffled down the hall. I turned a page in the paper and pretended to read about the mayor's budget proposal. Nelson appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt. Too neat, too early for a Saturday. His phone was clutched in one hand, thumbs scrolling furiously. The color had drained from his face, leaving a chalky pallor under his tan. "Morning," I said. My tone was neutral, casual. "Sleep well?" Shields. He blinked. Took a second too long to answer. "Yeah, fine. You?" "Exhausted. Long shift last night." I folded the sports section and pointed toward the coffee pot. "It's fresh." He poured himself a cup but didn't drink it. His other hand still hovered near his phone, tapping, swiping. Lula wandered in next, hair tousled, eyes soft with sleep. "Smells good," she said, kissing his shoulder. Then, glancing at me, "You're up early, Dad." Sling, sentenced. "Old habit," I said. "Can't break it." Shameful's eyes flicked up from his screen just long enough to meet mine. Something tight and guarded passed between us, an invisible current neither Lula nor the morning sunlight could cut through. He looked away first. The rest of the morning played out like a scene rehearsed by nervous actors. Lula talked about groceries. Nelson nodded at the wrong times. When she asked him twice if he wanted eggs, he mumbled something about losing his appetite. He excused himself to the porch, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and sharp. I didn't strain to listen. The point wasn't to know what he was saying. The point was to let him wonder how much I knew. When Lula left for her yoga class, the house fell quiet again. Nelson came back inside and hovered near the counter, pretending to look for something in the drawer. You, see anything interesting online last night? He asked without meeting my eyes. Stirred another spoonful of sugar into my coffee. Online? I barely touched that nonsense. Why? He shrugged too fast. No reason, just people post stupid stuff, you know? Jokes get taken the wrong way. I gave a soft chuckle. That's why I stick to newspapers. Ink doesn't talk back. He forced a laugh that ended in a swallow, then almost in a whisper. Someone left a weird comment on my post, probably spam. I repeated, tasting the word like a flavor I hadn't had in years. People can be strange. Yeah, he nodded, waiting for more from me. I offered none. The silence stretched. Finally he exhaled, muttered something about needing to make a call, and disappeared down the hallway. I spent the next hour cleaning the kitchen, a ritual that had always centered me. The rhythm of it soothed the pulse behind my ribs. Scrub, rinse, dry, repeat. The tile counters gleamed by noon. Silenced. From the hallway came fragments of Nelson's voice, half-sentences, curses muffled under his breath. Once I heard my name, quickly followed by, "No, no, it's nothing." Flushing. He was trying to control the narrative already, the way people do when they sense a storm they can't see. Good. Let him chase his own tail for a while. Inflation. Etchery. After lunch, he left the house without explanation. The sound of his car peeling out of the driveway echoed longer than it should have. Lula came home around 2, cheerful and oblivious. She brought fresh bread from the bakery and chattered about her class. I nodded, smiled in the right places, said nothing about the video, the comment, or the way her husband's face had turned the color of chalk dust. Shimmer. Misinformation yet. This needed time to ferment. Tightening. Against by evening, Nelson returned, quieter, slower. He smelled faintly of whiskey, though he tried to hide it under a mint. He kissed Lula, murmured that he was just tired. He didn't look at me. Unleashed. We ate dinner together, a fragile imitation of normalcy. Lula spoke for all 3 of us. When she laughed, Nelson smiled with only half his mouth. My fork scraped against the plate. Each sound landed like a tick of a clock counting down to something inevitable. Later, as dishes clinked in the sink, I excused myself to the living room. The air in there felt different now, denser, as if my house itself understood that something had shifted in its hierarchy. Eschly. I sat in the leather chair and opened Instagram again. The video was still up, but the caption had changed. Shimmer. Simmons. Just kidding around, folks. Don't take life too seriously. Hashtag all love. Unsure. A pathetic attempt at damage control. The comment thread was trimmed. A few had been deleted. But my message remained. He hadn't dared remove it. Shields. Sith that told me everything. Eshley. Around 10, Lula went to bed early, claiming a headache. Nelson lingered in the hallway, pacing softly. He stopped at the living room doorway, watching me pretend to read. Seizing. Covey. You know, Ruben, he said finally. I didn't mean any harm with that video. It was just a joke. Shields. According to slowly, letting the glasses slide down my nose a fraction. What video? Eshley. His mouth opened. Closed. You, maybe someone showed you? Strengthening. I don't watch many videos, I said, returning to the paper. But if something's bothering you, maybe you should delete it. Ensigns. Shoreline. He hesitated, then nodded like a man accepting defeat he didn't yet understand. Yeah, I'll do that. Strikeouts. He went to bed without another word. Exley. Relinquish. House was dark again. I remained in the chair, the only light coming from the dim lamp Sarah had loved. The comment had done its job. Nelson was unraveling faster than I'd hoped. Interceptions. Still, a single move rarely wins a long game. Seeds need water. Fear needs fertilizer. Like the next step, about the small ways a person can remind another that the walls have eyes. A misplaced object here, a faint sound there. Nothing cruel, just enough to keep him guessing. The quiet house around me creaked, settling into its own rhythm. To anyone else it was just wood expanding with the night chill, but to me it sounded like breath. Steady, patient, waiting. I whispered into that silence. Not a prayer, not a curse, just a promise. Let him learn what silence really means. By Sunday morning, the house had gone mute again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of silence anymore. It was the sort that listens back. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, felt like punctuation in a sentence only I understood. I'd slept little. Each time I drifted off, a new idea surfaced. What to move, what to rearrange, what to let Nelson discover. I didn't need confrontation. I needed uncertainty. Fear grows best in dim light. Mojo left early for her shift at the clinic. She kissed Nelson on the cheek before going. He flinched like her lips were cold metal. The moment her car rolled down the street, he turned toward me. "You got plans today, Ruben?" I kept my eyes on the crossword. "Nothing pressing. Why?" He hesitated, fingers tapping his phone. "Just making conversation." "Conversation's good," I said, filling in reticent across 8 letters. "Keeps the mind young." He smiled, tight and humorless, and retreated to the back porch. Through the window I could see him pacing, talking low into his phone again. The wind carried pieces of his sentences. "No, I deleted it. I swear I don't know who." By noon he'd called at least 3 people. I made lunch, humming to myself, the sound of calm routine. He didn't eat. He barely looked at me. When I stepped out to toss the trash, I caught him peering through the curtains toward me. The instant he saw that I'd noticed, he jerked away. So the paranoia had taken root. That night, I decided to feed it. We waited until the house went dark. Then I used the same forgotten account to leave a second comment. Not on the video this time, but on a photo of him and Lula taken months earlier. They were smiling in front of the restaurant I'd built. The house remembers everything. I hit post, locked the phone, and left it face down again. The words looked harmless, almost poetic, but I knew what they would do to him. The next morning he was gone before sunrise. His coffee mug sat empty in the sink, his car missing from the drive. Lula thought he'd gone for an early jog. I knew better. By the time he came home mid-afternoon, sweat darkened his collar, and his eyes darted around like he expected someone behind every corner. "You all right, Nelson?" I asked. "Fine, just needed air." "Good. Air clears the mind." He nodded, swallowed, and escaped to the bedroom. I listened through the thin walls, drawers opening, the faint click of his laptop. Then a muttered curse. He was probably searching for the account, trying to trace the ghost that had whispered in his comments. He wouldn't find it. I'd wipe the trail clean. Late that evening, Lula sat beside me on the couch, knitting, oblivious. "Nelson's been jumpy lately," she said. "Work stuff, maybe." "Maybe," I said. Shell looked at me the way Sarah used to when she suspected I was holding something back. I smiled softly. "You shouldn't worry, dear. Some people just don't sleep well when the house is quiet." She chuckled, returning to her yarn. "You and your sayings." When she went to bed, I remained in the dark, the only glow coming from the phone screen. I reopened the restaurant's old account, scrolled through Nelson's profile, and saw what I'd expected. The video was gone. Deleted. But was permanent. Screenshots always survive longer than apologies. I drafted a short message and saved it as a note, not yet posted. Corrections. Truth lives longer than laughter. I didn't know if I'd ever need it, but it felt good to have words waiting, like bullets in a drawer. Outside, a branch scraped the window in the wind, a soft, repetitive sound. It reminded me of the way Sarah used to tap her fingers against the table when she was thinking. I whispered into the dark. "He's learning, love. Slowly, but he's learning." The days that followed blurred into one another like watercolors left out in the rain, soft, bleeding, indistinct. And yet, Beneath the calm surface of the house, there was movement. Subtle, deliberate movement. Nelson didn't know it, but I'd started to notice his every hesitation, every pause before he spoke, every glance he stole toward his phone, every tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. The game had begun. Comment had done its job. That single sentence, "I know what you did," had wormed its way into his mind, feeding on his own guilt. The beauty of it was that he didn't even know what I knew. His imagination was my weapon, and guilt, once planted, blooms in unpredictable shapes. On Monday morning, I left early, before either of them woke. It wasn't for the restaurant. Retirement had seen to that. But I wanted to remind Nelson that I still had a world outside this house. I wanted him to wonder who else I might talk to, what else I might share. I drove downtown, stopped for coffee, and watched the street through the cafe window. People rushing to work, faces tight with the ordinary anxieties of daily life. I'd been one of them once, tired, driven, too busy to notice when the world started eroding around the edges. By the time I came home, the sun had moved higher, washing the kitchen in thin white light. Nelson sat at the table, staring at his phone with the kind of focus reserved for bad news. Lula stood at the counter, making a smoothie. The hum of the blender filled the silence. "Morned," I said, setting my keys down. Nelson looked up, startled, then quickly smiled, too quickly. "Morning, Reuben. You were out early." I shrugged. "Old habits. Can't sleep in anymore. Thought I'd grab some breakfast." I poured myself a glass of water, pretending not to notice how he shifted in his seat. His phone lay screen down now, face hidden, as if embarrassed. Lois smiled over her shoulder. "You could have told us. We could have gone with you." "That's all right," I said, sipping. "You two need your rest. You were out late again?" She nodded. "We met up with some friends. Nelson's cousin was in town." Nenstrel's eyes flicked up to mine. He knew I knew that wasn't true. He hadn't seen that cousin in over a year. The lie came easily to him. But lies leave residue. They hang in the air like smoke. I let it pass. I'd learned long ago that silence often said more than accusation ever could. That afternoon, I walked the perimeter of the backyard, inspecting the fence. The boards were weathered but solid. My neighbor's dog barked twice before losing interest. When I came back inside, Nelson's car was gone. I waited a few minutes, then went to the living room. His laptop sat open on the coffee table. A bad habit of his, he never logged out. I didn't need to touch it. I only needed to see the browser tab still open to Instagram. His account. He'd been scrolling through his own post again. My post now, in a way. The view count had passed 5,000. The comment thread stretched long and chaotic, but there, 2 comments above my own. Someone had written, "You went too far, dude. That's your father-in-law?" Nelson had replied, "Just a joke, he's fine with it." I smiled. So he'd already lied publicly. Good. Lies are like termites. They hollow a man out from the inside. I returned to my chair, the one Sarah had loved to tease me about, and took out my notebook. Not the digital kind. Real paper, real pen. A relic, perhaps, but then so was I. I made a list, the kind I used to make for staff schedules or inventory orders. Only this list was different. 1. Let him sweat. 2. Say nothing. 3. Watch Lula. Clang. Control the narrative. Shimmer. Precise. I'd learned, over decades of business, that chaos can be managed by order. The trick was to let the other person believe they still had control. Watching me. Not openly, but through reflections. The darkened TV screen, the mirror by the hallway. I didn't confront him. I simply existed. I made tea. I read the paper. I sat quietly while the house filled with its ordinary sounds. The refrigerator cycling, the pipes groaning, the faint murmur of Lula on a phone call in the other room. Around midnight, I heard Nelson's footsteps in the hallway. He was pacing. Then came the soft click of his phone camera. I closed my eyes, feigning sleep in my chair. He lingered near the doorway, and I could feel the weight of his stare. Let him think I didn't know. Let him wonder whether I'd seen the flash, whether I'd heard the shudder. The next morning, I left a note on the fridge. Jego, please remember to turn off the living room light when you come in late. The electricity bill has gone up. R. Misled. A simple message, but he would read it 3 times. He would ask himself whether it meant I'd seen him last night, whether living room light was a euphemism, whether I was hinting. That was how guilt worked. It took ordinary sentences and turned them into traps. Lula noticed the tension, though she misread it. "You two are funny lately," she said one evening while we ate dinner. "It's like you're both competing or something." I smiled. "Maybe we just see the world differently." Sentenced, Nelson forced a laugh. "Yeah, generation gap." Melting him lift his fork, the tremor in his hand barely noticeable. "You know," I said lightly, "back in my day, when someone mocked an elder publicly, it wasn't called a joke. It was called a mistake." Lula frowned. "Dad, what?" "Nothing, sweetheart." I wiped my mouth with the napkin. "Just talking about respect. It's an endangered concept." Nelson's fork clinked against the plate. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Occasionally, later that week I called an old friend, Peter, my former restaurant manager. I asked him to meet me for lunch. We hadn't seen each other since my retirement party. When he arrived, we hugged like brothers who'd been through war together. "Reuben," he said, "still running the show, I bet." I smiled. "Always." We talked for a while about the business, about how he'd expanded the catering side, how the new sous chef was working out. Then, casually, I asked, "You remember Nelson, my son-in-law?" He nodded. "Sure. He helped out one summer, didn't he? The kid who dropped the tray of wine glasses?" "The very one." I leaned back, letting my tone cool. "He's been posting some interesting things online. Jokes, mostly, about me." Peter frowned. "Jokes?" "Hardless, I suppose." I stirred my coffee. "But you know how perception works in our business. People talk." Reassured, dying immediately. "You want me to make a few calls?" I smiled faintly. "No need. Not yet. Just wanted to know if anyone's mentioned it. Any buzz." "Differing that I've heard." "None that I've heard," he said. "But if it starts, I'll shut it down." That was enough. Nelson wouldn't know it, but I just built a silent wall around him. Every path that led back to me was now guarded. That night, I returned home to find him in the driveway, smoking, a habit he'd picked up recently. The smell of burnt tobacco lingered around him like guilt. He flicked the butt away when he saw me. "Long day?" I asked. "Yeah, just thinking. Balloons. About what?" He shrugged. "Work? Life?" I nodded, stepping past him toward the door. Then I paused. "By the way," I said over my shoulder, "you might want to be careful with what you post online. Employers check that sort of thing these days." He froze. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing specific. Just general advice. Internet never forgets." I opened the door. "Good night, Nelson." His voice followed me weakly. "Yeah, night." Buffering morning, I checked his Instagram again. The video was gone. Deleted. Deleted. Disations isn't erasure, it's confession. He'd folded first. I smiled and poured myself a cup of coffee. Still, I wasn't finished. Not yet. The deletion was only the beginning. Now I needed to replace his sense of safety with uncertainty, to make him wonder whether the damage was already done. At lunch, I accidentally mentioned to Lula that I'd been hearing strange things. "Someone told me they'd seen something online about me," I said, stirring my soup. Shimmer, she frowned. "What kind of something?" "Oh, probably nothing. People gossip. Said there was a video, but I couldn't find it." Her brow furrowed. "A video?" Nell froze mid-bite. His fork hovered. "What video?" "I don't know," I said casually. "Probably just a mix-up." Then I looked directly at him. "Unless you've seen something?" His lips parted, then closed again. "No, nothing." "Good," I smiled. "Best not to dwell on rumors." I let the silence stretch until it began to hum between us. Then I stood, took my plate to the sink and rinsed it clean. That night, I dreamed of Sarah. She stood in the kitchen wearing her old blue apron, smiling at me as though nothing had changed. "You always did like order," she said. "But you forget, Reuben, order doesn't last forever." When I woke, the house was dark and cold. For a moment, I thought I heard her humming from the other room, but it was only the wind slipping through the eaves. I sat there for a long time, thinking about how easily things fall apart and how satisfying it can be to guide their collapse. On Friday, exactly 1 week after the post, Nelson came home late. I heard the front door open, the slow shuffle of his steps. I waited in the living room, lights dimmed, a single lamp casting long shadows. He stopped when he saw me. "Didn't know you were up." "Couldn't sleep," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Join me?" He hesitated, then sat. His eyes were red. What happened? His forgot had placed one late. That stuffed the post. He said just me, then certainly stop in getting. He said I did it when he was met it for a void, unless sat. His eyes were red, his posture slumped. "Look, Reuben, I want to apologize." "For what?" He swallowed. For anything that made you uncomfortable." "Anything?" I asked softly. He nodded. "Yeah, I took down that video. It was stupid." The C. I studied him. "Why'd you post it in the first place?" He sighed. "I don't know. I thought it was funny. People liked it. Guess I got carried away." "Fame's a tricky thing," I said, especially when you don't realize what it costs. Lag. Flickery belied his eyes. "Did someone say something to you? Did you talk to anyone?" I smiled faintly, nosing. The interdeck is a big place. Things travel. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you know who left that comment?" I tilted my head. "What comment?" "You know, the one that said." But if he stopped himself, realized what he'd always admitted, I love him back. "Nelson, sometimes we will worry about shadows that don't exist. Maybe it gets it right." He nodded weakly and stood. Like the doorway, he turned. "If I upset you, I'm sorry." "You upset me," I said. "But there it yourself." He sleep takes. Beatles appeared down the hall. Clicks. When the house grew quiet again, he sat there staring at the goddamn fireplace, but reflecting on the queer looked older. Hard. A little deep diphonic flicker of something satisfied. Maybe a regret. But I put it aside. Here's the work to do. The seed of fear had taken root. Black like any gardener. I identified the story blue. The arrived with the Euclid chili there. Tied the big swing skin prickle beneath layers of clothing. I woke before dawn. Now silent. With the fur leaf cycling. Within the darkness, I felt the tinkling of the walls. The air taking along the prairie of the weak surface. The lava stomach. Lulling the light. I cruised. They settled like ducks in the blue club. I drank tactics, the bubbling down the clear hour. They came, they biked me literally, clearly like it's already full of smoking calculators for me. I was saying I get the kicking table, lying sitting to the viewpaper without previously, I laying without him. Clearly, the curler fairy with his little thing when he tried to back it. The glags that lay too long, I said plugger, I trembling, playing your comic I really wanted. Glee purdy. I would blue in the hallway, footsteps, Kaylee, Lady, Blue play, Blue lives, Blue shot. Larry's got the kick of his logo, so he is playing from the shadows. Only I say, he would like to love the light, Callie. Collie's cook. He logging the green from his face, he was funny. His blue is stood, painted, blue. He being like his little blue, likely. Haley actually played Chinese played Haley like Kylie played like played police clearly either trying to detect from any single eye like are you pregnant live. To notice. I let him stew in the quiet house, in the tension I had cultivated. Lex creaked shortly after, cheerful and unsuspecting. "You two are quiet today," she said. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, eyes soft as always. "Nelson, you okay?" "Not fine," he said too quickly, too sharply. His gaze flicked toward me. A little challenge, a little fear. I made no move. I poured water into my cup and let the steam curl upward. My hands were steady, my posture deliberate. I allowed the silence to stretch, to weigh on him. But by mid-morning, Nelson had retreated to his bedroom, laptop open, muttering lowly to himself. I walked the living room slowly, listening. The faint click of keys, occasional sighs. One soft curse that cut sharply in the quiet. He was searching. He didn't know what, exactly, but I knew. He was tracing the account, trying to find the person behind the words, trying to find me. I smiled softly. Let him try. Let him dig through the digital rubble, chasing shadows I had left deliberately, like breadcrumbs in the snow. I spent the morning in the kitchen, cleaning, chopping vegetables for the week. The mundane tasks grounded me, kept me away from excitement but gave me clarity. Order, I realized, is a form of quiet power. The wind shifted outside, rattling the window panes. I glanced at the reflection in the glass. In the darkened room behind me, I imagined Nelson pacing, imagining threats, inventing enemies. I was patient. Patience is a weapon as sharp as any blade. Lunch passed with no conversation. He did not join me. When Lula returned from her shift in the early afternoon, she brought the smell of fresh bread and a light, sweet perfume that reminded me of Sarah. "Lunch?" she asked. "I brought sandwiches." I nodded. "Thank you. I'll save one for Nelson." She frowned at him, who was still in the bedroom. "He's been in there all morning." "For thinking," I said, "or worrying." Sometimes the two looked the same. Furrowed, but she said nothing more. That was fine. Let her think her husband was merely distracted. The real game was private. By evening, Nelson emerged, restless. His movements were nervous, jittery. He poured a glass of water with a hand that trembled. He looked at the kitchen table, then at me. His gaze darted to the living room. "Did you move anything?" he asked. "Unchecked?" I repeated, tilting my head. "I don't recall moving anything. I swear. I left my keys here, my phone." His voice wavered. "It's different." I leaned on the counter, smiling faintly. "Things change. Time moves on. You should sit, relax. Or did someone teach you not to trust your own house?" He swallowed, pale and silent. The seed of uncertainty had sprouted. I didn't need to push further. A small comment, a tiny shift in posture, a whispered doubt. These things grow. Fell. Lula retired to her room early. Nelson stayed in the living room, half-heartedly watching a game on television. I could see his anxiety in every twitch, fingers drumming against the armrest, leg bouncing, eyes flicking to the phone again and again. I poured myself a glass of water, careful not to meet his gaze. Then I spoke, softly, almost to myself. "You know, fear is funny. Not the big, shouting fear, the kind that makes someone run. It's the quiet one, the one that makes you check locks twice, scroll through messages endlessly, replay a sentence in your mind." He flinched. I didn't look at him. I simply sipped my water, letting the silence press against him like a physical weight. Later, after the game ended and the living room lights were dimmed, he left the phone face down on the table. I had noticed it immediately, and that's when I decided to escalate slightly. I opened the restaurant's old account again, typed a new comment on a photo he had posted months ago, a picture of him and Lula at the park, smiling at the camera. "Unless you can run, but you can't hide." I set the phone down with deliberate care. The words were short, almost poetic, but heavy with meaning. He would see it, and when he did, the spiral would tighten. I watched him through the reflection of the window as he scrolled. He froze for a fraction of a second. His face paled further. I smiled softly to myself. Exactly as planned. The night, I lay in bed thinking of all the ways I could keep him off balance. A misplaced glass here, a flicker of the light there, footsteps that weren't really footsteps. Every little shadow in the house could whisper doubt if he let it, and he was letting it. I closed my eyes and imagined Sarah. Her voice, calm and measured, seemed to echo through the house. Patience, Reuben. Let him unravel himself. I slept lightly, but slept satisfied. Every hour of wakefulness had been a calculated measure, every observation a quiet victory. The spiral had begun, and I would see it through. By the start of the week, the house had transformed. Not physically, of course. The furniture remained in its usual places. The tiles and counters gleamed as they always had, and the hum of the furnace was steady, almost comforting. No, it was the atmosphere that had shifted. The air was thick with tension, and every movement had a meaning beyond itself. Nelson was unraveling, and I was watching, patient, calm, waiting. If I woke early as usual, before dawn's gray light touched the horizon, the house was quiet, too quiet, some might say. I dressed slowly, deliberately, as if to remind myself that control came from measured steps. Coffee in hand, I walked to the kitchen, noticing every detail. The slight dent in the countertop from years of chopping vegetables. The faint ring left by my mug on the counter. The way the morning light pooled across the linoleum floor. Nelson's bedroom door creaked open around 7:30. His steps were soft, careful. I heard him pacing before he appeared in the kitchen. His eyes were rimmed with fatigue and something more, something that I could feel in the way the air shifted around him. Fear, subtle but undeniable. "Morning," I said lightly, setting down my coffee mug. "Morning," he muttered. His voice was tight, brittle. "Sleep well?" I asked casually, stirring sugar into my cup. "Yes, fine," he said, avoiding my gaze. I watched him carefully, noting the slight tremor in his fingers as he picked up a glass of water. The way he hovered over the counter, pretending to look for something, anything. Every motion was calculated, weighed, cautious, exactly as I intended. Lula arrived soon after, cheerful and oblivious to the underlying tension. "Good morning," she said, kissing his cheek. He flinched at her touch. I noted it, a small detail but significant. Fear manifests in tiny tremors. "Israel," I smiled at her. "You're up early." "Yes, I have a long shift," she replied. "How was the night?" "Quiet," I said. "The house seems to sleep peacefully when no one is shouting at it." Lorera raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She didn't know, and that was the way it should be. The morning passed in a delicate dance of observation. Nelson hovered near the counter, checking his phone obsessively. His every glance, every hesitation, every micro-expression broadcasted his anxiety louder than any words could. I sipped my coffee, pretending to read the newspaper. I didn't need to confront him. The tension, carefully curated, was enough. By late morning, he had retreated to the living room. The television was on, muted, but he was not watching it. His fingers drummed against the coffee table. I walked by slowly, my steps measured, deliberate, and noticed him flinch at my movement, as if I were a predator he could not see fully. The kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Each slice was precise, each motion deliberate. I let the knife fall in a rhythm that was almost meditative. The sound of it, soft, controlled, seemed to echo through the quiet house, bouncing off the walls and into Nelson's awareness. He had become so aware of every sound that even my knife hitting the cutting board registered as an intentional act, a message. Noon, I decided to test the boundaries further. I left a note on the fridge. Scrimmage. "Nelson, please remember to lock the back door when leaving. You never know who might be watching. R." Sipful, innocuous. Yet I knew what it would do. It would make him check the locks twice, maybe thrice, before leaving for the grocery store. And when he returned, he would feel the weight of my words lingering in the air. And he did. When he came back, the door had been checked repeatedly. His movements were nervous, precise. He avoided looking directly at me, though I could feel his gaze flitting toward me from the corner of his eye. Fear is a language, and he was speaking it fluently now. Lula came home mid-afternoon, humming softly. She looked at him and frowned. "You've been jumpy all day. What's wrong?" "Nothing," he said too quickly. I watched him closely, the hesitation, the way his jaw clenched, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. It all told me he was close to the edge. Perfect. I said nothing. Silence is a tool. Silence, paired with observation, becomes the strongest form of control. Nelson's paranoia had reached a palpable intensity. He sat in the living room fidgeting, glancing at his phone every few seconds. The deletion of the original video had not alleviated the tension. It had only made it worse. Now he imagined threats everywhere. Every message, every notification, every shadow in the house was a potential reminder of what he had done. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down, casually flipping through the newspaper. The soft rustle of pages echoed in the room. He flinched, a small, involuntary movement, but it made my lips curl into a quiet smile. The less, I used the restaurant's old Instagram account again. I typed a new comment under a photo he had posted months earlier, him and Lula smiling in front of the restaurant. "You can't escape what you've started." I hit post and set the phone down deliberately, letting the words settle into the digital ether. He would see it soon, and when he did, the spiral would tighten. That night, the house felt heavier, almost alive with anticipation. I prepared dinner with meticulous care, arranging plates and utensils exactly where they should be, the aroma of roasted vegetables and herbs filling the air. When Lula entered, she paused, noting the care I had taken. "Everything smells amazing," she said softly, smiled. "It's just routine." Nelson arrived shortly after, moving quietly. His face was pale, his eyes darting constantly. He avoided the dining room light, shadowing himself along the walls. He barely touched the food, picking at it nervously. "You okay?" I asked casually, keeping my tone neutral. "Aggression," he said, though his voice betrayed him. I didn't press further. The message was already delivered. Fear need not be acknowledged to thrive. Pensions. Disregarding Lula retired to her room, leaving Nelson alone with me. The living room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting long shadows. I moved to my chair, sitting with my hands folded over my knees. Nelson lingered, pacing slightly, restless. "You know," I said softly, "fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, waiting for you to notice it. Impartial." He froze, then forced a laugh. "Yeah, I guess so. Ceremonial. Satin." I smiled faintly. "I suppose the question is, do you notice it?" He didn't answer. He left the room, muttering something under his breath. The tension in the house was nearly tangible now, like a living thing coiled around our interactions. I sipped my water, calm, deliberate, satisfied. Late that night, I heard him moving through the house again. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, checking doors, windows, locks. I remained in my chair, pretending to read the newspaper. The house was silent, except for the faint creak of floorboards under his weight. I could almost feel him questioning every shadow, every reflection. Every ordinary sound became sinister in his mind. Fear, once planted, grows in strange, unpredictable ways, and I was its gardener. By the time I went to bed, I could hear the muffled click of his phone shutting down, his sighs heavy and frequent. Sleep would be impossible for him tonight, as it had been impossible for the past week. That was exactly as it should be. I lay in bed, eyes closed, thinking of Sarah. Her voice echoed softly in my mind, calm and measured. "Patience, Reuben. Let him unravel himself." I smiled. She always understood. Tomorrow, I would continue. The spiral wasn't over. It had only begun, and I would see it through to the very edge. The house was unusually quiet that Sunday morning. Not the kind of quiet that comforts the soul, but the kind that presses against your chest, heavy and suffocating. I woke before dawn as usual, moving slowly, savoring the calm before the inevitable storm. The smell of brewing coffee filled the kitchen. Steam curled gently from my cup, rising in soft spirals that mirrored the tension building inside the house. Nelson was already awake. I could feel it even without seeing him. His movements had become predictable, pacing, checking his phone, touching the doorknob, glancing toward me. Fear has a rhythm, and I had learned to recognize it. I poured myself a cup of coffee, deliberately leaving the kettle on the counter, the gentle whistle a reminder that sound can be a message too. By 7:30, he appeared in the kitchen, shoulders tight, face pale. The tremor in his fingers betrayed the effort he made to appear calm. "Morning," I said casually, keeping my tone light, deliberate. "Coffee's ready." He nodded, stiff, and took the cup I offered him without meeting my eyes. Every sip seemed labored, measured, as though he feared I would judge him for the smallest action. "You slept well?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yes, fine," I said softly, settling at the table and opening the newspaper without reading it. Silence, I reminded myself, is a tool as sharp as any blade. Nelson was unaware of how carefully he moved under its weight. By mid-morning, the spiral had intensified. He checked every room he passed, muttered under his breath, and avoided direct eye contact. Even Lula noticed his tension. She came into the kitchen with a lightness that only emphasized his shadowed state. "You two are funny lately," she said, glancing between us. "Like there's some invisible game going on." "Perhaps," I replied lightly, stirring my coffee. "Some games are better left unspoken. The rules are invisible, yet everyone feels them." Lula raised her eyebrows but said nothing. I let it pass. Let her think it was abstract musing. The real game was between him and me. By afternoon, Nelson's behavior had escalated to almost visible agitation. His phone was constantly in his hands, fingers hovering over the screen, scrolling, double-checking, erasing, typing, hesitating. The restaurant's old Instagram account had delivered a few subtle messages over the week, each one a small nudge, a whisper into the dark corners of his mind. Now he was walking the edge, looking for ghosts that didn't exist, but feeling their presence at every turn. I moved about the house calmly, slicing vegetables for dinner, humming softly, cleaning surfaces. The mundane tasks gave me purpose and allowed me to maintain the facade of ordinary life. But every motion was a message, every glance a statement, every silence a mirror in which he could see his own guilt reflected. By evening, I decided to escalate further. I left a note on the counter, handwritten in careful script. "Remember, every action leaves a mark. Some marks fade, others remain. Think carefully before you act." Simple, insinuating, perfect. I knew he would read it 3 times, perhaps aloud, wondering if it was directed at something he had done, something I knew. He arrived home later that night, dragging his feet, as though carrying a weight too heavy to lift. His face was pale, eyes darting, posture tense. I was already seated at the kitchen table, coffee in hand. "Evening," I said casually. "Long day?" He said, voice tight. "Long day." I nodded. "Good. Rest is important. Helps keep the mind clear." He moved to the living room, fidgeting with his phone, muttering to himself. I remained in the kitchen, casually stirring my coffee, listening to the faint click of keys, the occasional sigh, the restless shuffle of feet. Penchant, once planted, is patient. I had learned this over decades, and now it was blooming. Trembling. Late that night, the house was silent, except for the soft creak of the floorboards and the faint hum of the furnace. I watched Nelson pacing in the living room through the reflection in the kitchen window. His face was drawn, eyes darting, hands trembling slightly. He stopped, turned, and glared toward the kitchen. A silent accusation, or perhaps a plea. Interception. I poured another glass of water, deliberately loud, letting the sound echo in the quiet house. He flinched, gripping the edge of the coffee table. Perfect. I spoke softly, almost to myself, though he could hear. "You know, Nelson, fear is a curious thing. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it lives in the small details, the subtle changes, the things you think you've missed. It grows quietly, like a vine around your mind." His shoulders tensed, every muscle coiled. I didn't need to say more. The message was received. Over the next few days, I continued my subtle campaign. Misdirected footsteps, faint shadows, small noises at irregular intervals. The house became a labyrinth of doubt for him. Every phone notification, every misplaced item, every ordinary sound became a trigger. I maintained my calm, my composure, my ordinary routine. To him, the house had become a trap he could not escape. Liz, ever perceptive, noticed the change in her husband but misread it. "Nelson, you've been on edge all week," she said one evening. "Something's bothering you. Can't you tell me?" He shook his head, unable to meet her eyes. "Nothing," he muttered. I smiled faintly. Silence spoke louder than words. The tension between him and me was now palpable. A living, breathing entity. One night, around 2 in the morning, I heard him whispering to himself in the living room. I didn't move. I listened. Who knows?" he muttered. "Who's watching me? Who—" He words trailed off into a shiver of panic. I stayed still, letting him unravel. Every syllable, every hesitation, was a confirmation that the spiral had succeeded. By dawn he was exhausted, pale, trembling. His paranoia had reached a point where even I, the orchestrator, could see its intensity. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't thinking clearly. Every action was clouded by doubt, guilt, and fear. That morning, I poured coffee and placed it on the table in front of him. His hands shook as he took it. I studied him closely, noting every twitch, every flicker of hesitation, every shadow of doubt in his eyes. "You look tired," I said softly. "You should rest." I will," he muttered, voice barely audible. I leaned back in my chair, calm, deliberate. "Fear is a teacher, Nelson. It shows you what you must see, but it also shows who you truly are." He froze, the words sinking in. I didn't need to explain further. He understood. By the end of the week, Nelson was a shadow of himself. Every move calculated, every glance suspicious, every word measured. The anonymous comments, the subtle messages, the quiet manipulations. They had done their work. He was fractured, uncertain, fearful of the ordinary. Embraces, deliberate, patient. I had not raised my voice. I had not threatened him physically. I had not confronted him directly. Yet the message had been delivered. The spiral was complete. The edge had been reached. And from my perspective, the house was quiet once more. But the quiet was different now. Heavy, charged. It was the silence of victory. I poured myself another glass of water, smiling faintly. The lesson had been taught. Unsafe in the dark corners of the house, Nelson would remember it every waking hour.